We appreciate you giving us your time this morning to take part in Leadership Austin's Engaged Breakfast. I'm Judy Maggio. I'm the editorial director at Austin PBS, KLRU. So real quick, our topic, it's such a good one for December. It's building bridges through faith-based leadership. I have always enjoyed our faith discussions that we've had through Leadership Austin, and they've always come away with some meaningful nuggets for all of us. If you do post on social media, and we hope you do, we want you to spread the word this morning. The hashtags are LeadershipATX or Lead Engage. I want to begin by introducing Courtney Bailey. Here's Courtney. She is Leadership Austin's Director of Issues and Engagement. Courtney? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
So as Judy mentioned, my name is Courtney Bailey, and I'm the Director of Issues and Engagement at Leadership Austin. I also lead the Engaged Breakfast series. So if you have any feedback on the content, the themes that will be discussed, the panel or future panels, please see me. On behalf of Leadership Austin, welcome to our Engaged Breakfast series on building bridges through faith-based leadership. As we gather this morning, let me remind us that our goals for these breakfasts are simple. So 1, we want to share information about an important community issue. 2, our hope is that you hear a perspective that is different from your own. And 3, when you leave this room, we hope that you're inspired to act. And that could be something as simple as sharing information with a friend or family member, or being called to get more involved on this community issue and help shape community policy. So now, who in here is an alumni? Raise your hand. Okay, nice. So I'm looking at all of you. So after the Engaged Breakfast, we have our Alumni Corner. It's a new pilot that we have kicked off this series. And this is an opportunity for Leadership Austin alumni and current class members to participate in about a 40-minute reflective dialogue about the panel. And this is also an opportunity for you to share your feedback. So for today's Alumni Corner, we have 2 guest alumni in our Essential program. We have Simone Talmo-Flowers of IACT and Hotan Shabazi Harmon of the, Shabazi Harmon of the Spiritual Assembly of Baha'is of Austin. Ladies, can you please stand? I actually think Simone is the only one here. So thank you. Immediately after the Engaged Breakfast, you can make your way to that back table and you'll have your dialogue. So next, you'll see on the screen a list of our sponsors. So we would like to thank St. David's Healthcare, Texas Gas Service, Wells Fargo, and Austin Community Foundation for their ongoing support this season. Thank you so much. And lastly, we also send our thanks to our presenting sponsor, Extension Seton. And so Geronimo Rodriguez, the Chief Advocacy Officer, will be here to close out the Engaged Breakfast. And he'll say a few words. Thank you again.
Thank you, Courtney. Just a couple more reminders before our conversation gets started. First of all, as Courtney mentioned, we're going to have that alumni corner with Simone and Hotan afterwards, and we can continue this wonderful conversation then. Also, the very back table in the middle, right in front of the cameras, I'm going to be leading what we call our Listens Tour at KLRU and Austin PBS. We just rebranded, so it's hard for me to remember Austin PBS and not say KLRU first, but it's the same place. Our program is Decibel. It's the News and Public Affairs platform, and we really value engagement on issues, key issues in the community. We have some ideas for 2020 of issues we would like to cover, and I would very much love it if some of you could stick around and talk to us about those issues and pass along story ideas, why those issues might matter in your life. So we're going to be listening to everyone afterwards at that table right there in the back. It won't be recorded or anything, maybe take a few pictures, but we just love to hear from the community. We're all about engagement, just like this breakfast, and that's why the partnership with Leadership Austin works so well. We're often covering the very same issues in our community. We are live streaming this conversation, this breakfast this morning on our Decibel ATX Austin PBS site. So if you want to share this conversation with someone who probably couldn't get downtown this morning, please do that via Facebook. It will also live on YouTube and on the Leadership Austin website. Lots of ways that you can engage others who might want to hear this conversation. So without further ado, let's get to it. I want to introduce our wonderful panel this morning. One more important person I need to introduce. This is called Engaged Breakfast, and we allow you to participate by texting in questions. So if you want to do that, the instructions are right there on your screen, but I want to introduce Ana Cristina Gonzalez. She is the Chief Operations Officer at St. William Catholic Church. She is also an Emerge 2000 alum, and she is going to essentially be your voice today. She will be reading the questions that you all are asking of our panel. So thank you, Ana, for sharing your talents and expertise with us this morning. Now let's meet our panelists today. First of all, we have Julie Lyles-Carr. Julie serves as the pastor of women's ministry at her home church of Life Austin. Then we have Daryl Horton. Daryl serves as the assistant to the pastor and youth pastor for Mount Zion Baptist Church here in Austin. Then we have Islam Mossad. Islam is the imam at the North Austin Muslim Community Center. And finally, down on the end, we have Rabbi Gail Swedrow. Gail is the associate rabbi at Congregation Agudas Achim. Now, I want to say we know that this panel is not representative of all faiths here in Central Texas, and there are certainly perspectives that you might not hear today. Austin is home to hundreds of faith-based groups, and so I'm hoping that perhaps the audience questions may reflect some of those other faiths that you might not see up on our panel today. But whether your faith is represented on the panel or not, we hope that you can take away something meaningful to you from today's discussion. And we certainly don't expect our faith-based leaders to solve all of our community problems, but we do want to acknowledge and discuss today how faith leaders can contribute collectively to the well-being of our community. So I have a first question for everyone. And if you could kind of remain a little bit brief, because we have 4 panelists, we have a lot of territory to cover today. What does building bridges through faith-based leadership mean to you, and what role do you see faith playing in how we engage with each other in our community? And Julie, my friend, I will start with you.
To launch off.
You are right there on the plate, up to the plate, my dear.
Right. I think for myself and for those that I lead, what I want to hopefully begin the conversation with when it comes to connecting these bridges between different forms of faith in our community is asking myself and others to bring to the table a sense of curiosity. I think it's really easy for us to decide that we know what we believe and we know our deal, and we've heard that these people do this, do that, enact in this way, and we don't take the time to really get curious about what has guided each of us, what has shaped each of us, how we see our purpose on the planet, how we frame that within our faith walks. And so curiosity to me is a great place to begin scaffolding a bridge within our community to just ask questions and just get to know why someone is motivated and what drives them through faith.
I love that, the scaffolding on the bridge. That's a great visual to what we're talking about today. Daryl?
Sure. I also like that, and I was thinking about exploration. Mm-hmm. It's the idea that we can get comfortable in our places of worship just as we do in our places where we live, but it's important for us to get out and to build relationship and to continue to build that bridge, because again, how can we effectively live in community if we don't have relationship with other people? And so I think the faith community has a great opportunity to do that, and I think it's also a wonderful way to do that because we learn about each other, but we also build relationship that impacts the entire community at the same time.
Islam?
All right, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, peace be to you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Don't worry, it's not a long speech. But I'd like to introduce with the praise for God and the peace and blessings on his prophets. So I think for me, after curiosity and exploration, I think connection to God, connection to others, that we were having a discussion with Rabbi Gail about she knows her neighbor who's a Muslim and who comes to the mosque. and we're getting to know each other as a panel. So I think just connection to God, connection to one another, and respectful interaction. And so I think the importance of feeling connected as a human family, and that trumps any sort of ethnic or even ideological foundations that a person may have.
Gail.
So thinking about what everybody has said here, certainly agree with all of it. And the second part of the question in terms of how faith might impact or inform how we approach building these bridges. I know that many religions have different thoughts and can teach us many different lessons. For me specifically, I think about how Judaism teaches me to engage with the stranger in my community, with people that I don't know, with the vulnerable in my community, with how I should welcome guests, and how I should always be asking questions, and equally importantly, the thoughtful ways that we're encouraged to respond to questions that are asked of us. So I think assuming that people are coming to building community with a good intention, and so being able then to respond appropriately so that we can engage and build connections and interact with one another to move forward.
I see so many great themes here. We have curiosity, exploration, connection, engagement. Aren't those all wonderful words for just living a good life and caring about our fellow human being? I'm wondering, as we move into 2020, and the world is an interesting place, how is that, the changes that you see in our world, changing the way you lead at your place of worship? Who wants to start with that one?
Yeah, well, I can start. I think a lot of pressure on me as an imam to get back on Facebook.
Really?
So I was on Facebook and I got off of Facebook for various reasons, and now everybody's saying you need to get back on Facebook. And so I think the new world of social media, not just for young people anymore. My mom, she is very active on Facebook. So I think everybody...
That's why you're supposed to be back on. Your mom wants to keep an eye on you.
Exactly. So I think for me, the social media dimension of how to, again, using that word of connection, how to connect with people in a respectful, inspirational manner, that this is something that we face as faith leaders, is expanding the horizon from simply a sermon from the pulpit to engagement even over electronic media.
I would absolutely agree with you, Amon, because we have begun an online campus, and I'm supposed to be over that and leading that, and I'm trying to figure it out. How do you really engage great conversation and community and caring for one another in the way that we think about in the local congregation, but do that via the internet? It's a really fascinating question, and can you do that well? And can you really activate people in a way that is powerful and helps them to become change makers within their communities? It's a really interesting question in 2020, I think, for a lot of us as we try to figure out what the digital platform will look like when it comes to leading faith groups.
Daryl. Or Gail, either one.
Similarly, I think there's a lot of expectations about being able to be fully present with people in person and giving lots of time and energy in a directed way while also being able to respond immediately to world happenings and posts that you may put online that have to be framed in a particular way, because it's so hard to tell exact tone or read between the lines in a Facebook post. I am so tempted to get off of it, but I know that I would be met with similar responses were I to go off. And so then how to be able to respond quickly, or to think about, well, I'm going to post this knowing I'm not going to have time to go back on Facebook for a few hours because I'm going to be with people, and how to encourage that caring relationship if you're not in person. That's something I think about a lot.
And I would say quickly, I think part of the challenge as well is helping people to understand the importance still of having personal relationship, about the importance of actually coming to a place of worship for worship, and what that does for you, and how we live in such a society where things are quick and instant, and I want to text this and I want to move there and I don't have time to be there. And so I think part of the challenge is helping people to understand that there is a benefit to being in worship, to being in a place where you can actually see someone and touch someone, and not helping them to further that false idea of friends and relationship that you get on social media. So I think that's one of the big challenges as well.
Great perspective. Anna, you have a question from the audience.
Kind of goes in conjunction with social media, because as much as there are good things that can happen on social media, we also hear about the not so great things that are happening in social media. And since this is a faith-based conversation, there's a lot of commentary about truth. And in this day and age, how have you seen the definition of truth change in your different communities? Have you seen maybe social media, the media, people who pretend to be the media affect what your congregation, your people's truth is?
That's an in-depth, deep question. Who wants to start with that one? Defining truth in 2020.
I think that in more recent times, people, at least in my community, may have, not everybody, it's hard to, there's a saying that says 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And so I think more recently, it's felt sometimes like that adage or that joke is not in the forefront of people's minds in the ways that it used to be. It used to be assumed that people would have different opinions and we would still be in one community. The Talmud, which is a collection of legal material and also wisdom stories, one of the beautiful things about it is that it contains differing opinions side by side on the same page. And one of the things we take from that is that it's supposed to model for us how we're in dialogue. And sometimes even in the course of an argument, the text will say essentially just like, we leave it, we don't know what the answer is. There isn't a definitive truth. And it seems to be even more of a necessary reminder today, because people don't often remember that sometimes we don't know what the truth is, or that there might be multiple truths that are existing at the same time, and how can we coexist on the same page?
Multiple truths, indeed.
Yeah,
Anybody else want to talk about that?
Just want to lead from her joke. So 2 Muslims, 1 opinion, but about 12 footnotes. I think the importance of finding common principles within religious traditions and between religious traditions, I think it's not too difficult to do, to find the golden rule, for example, to find the importance of the sanctity and sacredness of life, to find the respectful engagement of the other. So what I seek to do as a leader in the Muslim community, which is very diverse, maybe 60 different countries of origin, with different sects of Islam coming to the same mosque, is to try to find that common ground as principles, whereas we also respect the differences that we may have at the same time.
I would say that one of the exciting challenges that we have when it deals with this is that everyone has access to information that comes from around the world, and people struggle with what is truth and how do I know whether this is true. And so I think the exciting challenge for us as clergy is to be able to take these ancient texts that we still live by, that we read, that we study, and be able to show our congregation and our communities how that truth is still relevant and how it still applies. And it doesn't matter whether it's Facebook, Instagram, it doesn't matter what pops up around the corner, but showing that the words that we follow are still true. And so that's the challenge we have, is how do we make it relevant, how do we make it practical, and even as this generation moves forward and they quit using technology and something else comes, it's going to be the same challenge again.
You think people will stop using technology? That could
No,
be fun
probably
for a while.
not, but
It could be really fun for a while. We could really reach that one-on-one audience.
That's
couldn't
right.
you? Yeah.
I do
Julie?
think, too, that one of our challenges in faith communities when it comes to this conversation about what is truth, how do we evaluate that, how do we stand on what we believe is truth, is encouraging our people to say, all truth needs to be embedded in a humility. Because sometimes truth gets transposed as a form of pride. and as a form of arrogance. And when that happens, we lose the ability to stay in that humble place that many faiths agree on, that we are to walk out our lives in a place of humility, in a place of reverence. We all agree on that. And so when we lose that, I think we actually lose the ability to go seeking after truth, because in that position, we all of a sudden are becoming defensive. We are becoming defense attorneys for our particular belief system. So I think as faith leaders, the more we can encourage a place of saying, hey, yes, there are going to be places that we stand. There are going to be things that we decide are really important and true to us that other people are going to disagree with. But to stand on a bedrock of humility, of humbleness and respect, I think is such a powerful, powerful place to begin a conversation about truth.
Wonderful perspective. I want to talk to Gail and Julie about the perspective of being a female in faith. Women are ordained in a lot of different religions now. They hold leadership positions, but few women still have the opportunity to serve at that very top level of power in many faiths. Here are a few statistics. 50.8% of the U.S. population are women. Yay! Women earn about 57% of undergraduate degrees and 59% of all masters. Women account for 47% of the U.S. labor workforce and 52.5% of the college-educated workforce. We are a force of nature, we females. With that being said, I want to talk to you both, and I have two questions for each of you. The first question is, what are the unique challenges that women faith-based leaders face? Julie?
I'm of the Christian tradition, and I think that one of the things that I have faced both personally and then observationally is one of two things that happens. It's very interesting. The first being those who really believe women don't really necessarily have a place at a leadership table. And that's truly their conviction, and that's truly where they stand, and you have to sit with that. You just have to go, okay, that's where they're at. But the other one that is more interesting to me and is more at times a place in which I live is those who aren't necessarily trying to say you don't get to come to the table. It's simply the really innocent but insidious experience of when there have been a group of men who have been the ones who have run things for a very, very long time. The exclusionary language and the exclusionary experiences aren't even really in that consciousness. You'll have the experience where you'll look up at a faith event and it will be all guys, and nobody was trying to be mean. Nobody thought about it though, because it's just been so the habit and practice for so long that men hold the platform, men hold the positions. So those are the things that I see are really in tandem right now and are a real challenge. Because there are those who simply aren't even going to have the conversation. This is how it's been. This is how it's going to be. There are those who are really opening up to that, but trying to retrain your optics on it, trying to retrain yourself to see things in a fresh way. Because let's face it, we're all busy. We're all trying to take care of people. We have a lot going on. We have budgets we have to deal with and all these different things. And to actually take the pause and go, did we actually include people in a representative way, in an intentional way? When my phone list, it's just easy to call, these 5 guys have got relationship and I know what's going on. Or am I gonna have to really sit down and think about, have I made sure to be really inclusive of women in this space and in this conversation and in getting their feedback? That's what I see a lot in my experience.
So, one of the things that I see from my experiences is that in an individual synagogue, certainly the ones that I've visited or have been a part of, that the people there are excited and open to and accepting of women being in a leadership role as a clergy member. However, there seems to be still this gap of what it would mean for a place to have 2 clergy members who were women. Certainly I can think of many churches where and synagogues where there are multiple men. I don't know how many mosques have multiple imams on staff. So, but where there might be, 2, 3, 4, in really large synagogues, 5 clergy members who are all men. And whether or not it's because women are being intentionally excluded from those leadership roles, most of the places I'm thinking of, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. However, It has been both said to me explicitly and also just sort of a vibe that I've gotten, that if a synagogue already had one woman rabbi or cantor on their staff, that if I were interested in applying for that position, that it would not be the best use of my time. And so that's really challenging. And so then what does it mean once I or another woman is in that leadership position? Is it only to round out a particular visual or presumed skill set, or is it because of the particular skills and talents that I'm going to be bringing to the community?
I have a follow-up question, and this really could be answered by the men on our stage too. We don't want to make you feel discriminated against in any way, shape, or form. What role do you think faith-based organizations can play in challenging some of these gender inequities in our community, and more importantly, perhaps uplifting women in the community who might be marginalized for whatever reason? Are there ways that the faith-based community can play a role in lifting?
Yeah, I think Islam, one of the common stereotypes is the oppression of women or subjugation of women. But if we look at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, 14 centuries ago, he would, at least within his society, believe it or not, be viewed as a feminist because of how much he advocated for the liberation of women and for the equality of women with men in terms of various rights within society. And then over time, certain patriarchal cultures have crept back into the teachings of Islam, which produce for people on the outside what they think is Islam, but is in fact remnants of particular culture that Islam sought to actually do away with. So I think bringing people back to the original tenets and also teachings of the faith and the Prophet, in our case the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, and taking that spirit as opposed to taking an inheritance of culture over the accrual of time and passage of time.
And I would say that within the faith community, there has to be conversation and communication. And what I mean by that is understanding the value that you have seen in the past, and understanding even from the Bible and from whichever text we use, just understanding the value that each person brings to the table. Because I think Julie said it well, that there are so many who are afraid to even have the conversation. And whether you can be moved or not is not the point, but can you have the conversation, at least come with humility to hear the conversation. And I think that's how you begin to make that move and make that change, and at least let people understand that this is where you stand and why, but be able to have that conversation respectfully and still appreciate the contribution of all persons to your faith.
I would say, too, the Jesus that we follow very much in the way that you were describing the Prophet Muhammad is that we feel that he definitely brought forward women in the culture. And we have lost sight of that through the years in many ways, and have had skirmish wars, gender wars over who got to sit where, and we're still sorting a lot of that out. When it comes to really activating our faith communities to help bring women up and to elevate them and to look at women who are in marginalized situations, I was invited to a panel of faith leaders, and it was pretty much men, and like you're saying, was I the token girl there, or was I there because, I don't know why I was there. But the question was asked, what can we do to really help women in very difficult situations and impoverished situations? What can we do? And I asked this particular group, well, how many of you own your own businesses? How many of you are entrepreneurs? How many of you are in hiring positions? And virtually the entire room raised their hands. And I said, well, I tell you the very best thing you can do. I mean, I know that you're passionate about starting nonprofits or programs or all kinds of things, but if you would simply pay the women in your organizations the same wage you pay the men.
That's a start.
You would help eliminate some of these issues. You would raise women by your behavior, and you would make such a powerful statement, and you're all people of faith in here if you would do that. They haven't had me back.
So I found this question really fascinating. A year or so ago, I came across a some research that was done in an Oxford University Press publication called She Preached the Word, Women's Ordination in Modern America. And they asked, one of the questions that they asked was whether the presence of prominent women religious congregational leaders impacted the self-worth and empowerment of youth later in life. And what they found through surveys and phone call interviews was that 9 out of 10 Americans reported having attended religious services on a regular basis at some point when they were a kid, and that seeing women in leadership positions, that was like a perfect opportunity to see a woman in a leadership position that they might not have otherwise. So based on this, they found that women who did not have female religious leaders as children, compared to those who did have female religious leaders as children, reported that they were 10% less likely to agree with having high self-esteem as an adult, and 30% less likely to strongly agree with having high self-esteem as an adult. And that, interestingly, it didn't seem to impact the self-esteem of men if they had women or male clergy when they were children. But so this idea sort of building upon what Julie said about how equal pay certainly elevates and encourages us to shift how we see and value what women are contributing to society. Similarly, when we see women in positions of leadership, of preaching, of creating space for families in challenging times, that then shows women, oh, right, I can be in those leadership roles for myself also and see what I'm doing as having value as well.
Anna, another question from the audience.
Yes. So how does your faith community provide spaces for those who don't have a voice? So we're talking about women issues here, how to bring up women leaders in our churches, but there are also a plethora of other voices that do need a place at the table of your places of worship. So how do you bring those voices in, especially if they're not ones that usually are voices that you partner with?
These questions are so impressive this morning.
I think some of them can be on the panel.
Yes, next
here
year we'll
as
get you on the
well.
panel.
So for us, we have the concept of shura, which is a mutual consultation, where we consider everybody's opinion as valuable and to be presented and at the same time considered and weighed in a very serious manner by those who are taking decisions, as opposed to being authoritarian or unilateral type decisions, that we take the shura from, or the consultation from men, from women, even from the youth. One of the events I was supposed to attend today, where I was supposed to speak, I said, well, there's a young Muslim high school young woman who is really eloquent. So instead of me speaking, I said, well, she can go and speak, especially I'm here in the morning. So she can go and speak in the afternoon. And in this way, we bring perhaps, and it's our responsibility as people in leadership positions, to bring people who may be a little bit timid or even kept back, to bring them, as the questioner mentioned, to bring them to the forefront so that they have their own voice as well.
Anybody else want to comment on providing voice to some people that are often voiceless?
I think in my personal experience that happens just through awareness, because often you don't know the voices that are not heard until you encounter one of them. And so for me, as I become aware of them, it's a learning opportunity, and it's an opportunity for me to figure out, what is this voice trying to say? What is this voice trying to get done? And how can I best to help that? And so oftentimes it is going back to the congregation, providing information, providing awareness to the congregation, or as a representative of the congregation, sometimes it's something that I can just do as an individual representing the church or representing a group, and try to make that voice more well known, but not always speaking on behalf of that voice, but sometimes it's opening the door and providing an opportunity for that voice to be heard themselves. Because I can't always speak, or I'll say often we cannot speak as eloquently as the person can for themselves. So our obligation is to open a door for them to be heard.
And this is one place that I think technology really can work well within our faith communities, because really at the core of it, if you want other voices to be heard, you have to ask. You have to ask. And so we have times that we will actually survey our congregation and ask what's on their hearts and what's going on and what do you see addressed and what is not being addressed. And then it does take, as you were saying, the challenge of trying to combine that with, well, is this where we're headed as a faith community in this particular congregation? Is that something we're going to take on, or is that something we can help meet? But I do think just the core of it is saying, are we asking our people what they need and what their voices are and the challenges that they're facing?
Adding on what Daryl was saying, right, when people share a need that's not being met, specifically when it's a voice that we may not hear as often, I see my role as, one of my roles as being there to guide them to be a part of the larger system of the congregation so that they can then advocate for themselves, and we can partner together to find ways to best meet their needs.
I guess it's no surprise that about 3/4 of Texans identify as Christians. But Texas also has one of the largest and fastest growing Muslim communities in the United States. And in fact, there are nearly 340 mosques here in Texas and more being built. So Islam, this is a question for you. I know that you lead one of the largest mosques here in Central Texas, and anti-Muslim sentiment has been very prevalent in our nation and right here in our community. And I think that your mosque has experienced some of that vandalism. Talk about the unique challenges faced by the Muslim community in Texas and across the country. And the second part of the question is, how can we as non-Muslims better educate ourselves on Islam and the Muslim American community?
Sure. So the mosques in the Austin area, many of them have been targeted. Even a mosque, Islamic Center of Lake Travis, was actually burned to the ground as soon as it was about to open. So even though we have in Austin a very open-minded, very inclusivist population, there are still elements out there like that. But the part that I want to focus on, also in a Corpus Christi mosque, is that there were so many funds which came in from non-Muslims to rebuild those mosques. And Muslims also reciprocate in other situations to help rebuild synagogues or churches. So I think that mutual good feeling, especially between Muslims, Jews, and Christians, but with faiths in general, but with what we call the people of the book, I think in terms of education, if you're a Jew or Christian, you already have probably about 80% of knowledge about Islam, but it's that 20% that people seek to divide us on those areas. And so I think the importance of highlighting the good friendships, the good relationships, that will drown out the hateful voices, the bigoted voices which may be there against Islam, or for that matter, anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, or discrimination against Christians for their beliefs, that there's so much more welcoming. Even right after 9/11, we got more flowers than death threats at the mosque. So, this is something that is welcoming about the American society, and that Muslims are a part and parcel of Austin, and they're contributing and benefiting also from the growth of the city and the really the great aspects of my home. People ask me, where are you from? And then I tell them Austin. No, where are you really from? I say, Austin. I say, you're the invader from California. Why are you telling me where I'm from? So, so thank you.
I'm going to turn to Anna again because we've had so many delightful had great insight from our audience this morning.
Well, this leads to a question about safety. I think that as we see constant coverage on violence and in places where it's predominantly people of color, there are places where faith-based communities have been attacked and have been really targeted. Have you found that your communities feel less safe, or that there is a bit more fear in coming to worship? And how do you handle that, balancing what we're seeing in the world, but also what our message is as people of faith in terms of trust and being able to gather and really thrive from what our faith teaches us?
Right, everybody looks at me. Yeah. So, which I think says something. But our synagogue is on a larger Jewish campus, along with a few other synagogues and Jewish schools and a Jewish community center, among other things. And so on the one hand, there's a sense of insularity and safety because, we're this campus and it's not just us, and there's security guards and a gate, and, you need a little pass to come onto campus. And on the other hand, sometimes it feels like increased vulnerability because look at us, we're this big group of Jews. And certainly after, in the last few years, where there have been increased attacks on Jewish institutions, both synagogues, and even just yesterday there was a Jewish supermarket in Jersey City where there was an active shooter situation and folks died. There has been, at least in Austin and certainly in other places in the country, an outpouring of support. Last fall, after the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, it was overwhelming how many people came out to support the community. We ran out of space in the room that we were in, and folks were upset that they weren't able to show their support in person. We had to repeat the speeches outside on the lawn, which was incredibly heartwarming. But so one thing that we have really tried to focus on is how to not be afraid. There's a Jewish teaching by Rabbi Nachman that the entire world is a very narrow bridge, but the essence and the most important thing is to not be afraid. And how do we continue to live our lives and to worship? And there certainly are conversations happening in my community that I never would have anticipated when I was in school, and even a post on a clergy Facebook group I'm in asking if folks were having, and if they were, how they were handling a drill of sorts during Shabbat services, so that people could be safe and not just victims who never think of these things.
For us, I don't believe that there is a sense of the community being more afraid. I do think that when those things happen, people become more aware and they become more conscious of their surroundings. And so I think it is our responsibility as faith leaders just to make sure that the place can be as safe as it can be. But also we have to ensure the people, I think as Gail said, is that we don't live in a spirit of fear. We don't live in a moment where we're afraid because our faith transcends what happens here in the physical. And so we understand that because of our faith that everything in this world is temporary, and although you may not want to leave now, but if something were to happen, we understand that our faith holds us and tells us that there is a better place to come. And so we can fully live out our faith without fear, without being afraid, and at the same time making sure we take all the precautions that we can to be safe.
While I have you on the microphone, Daryl, I want to talk to you a little bit about your location there in East Austin. I think most people in this room know that Mount Zion Baptist is in East Austin. This is an historically black area of our city. And that's largely due to the legacy of the 1928 master plan, which basically, I think all of you have heard of this, but this plan forced black Americans, many Hispanics, to live east of what is known as I-35 now. But the black community there created wonderful schools, businesses. Many found solace in a place of worship. We also know that right now the East Side is undergoing massive changes. A lot of people who made their home now are being forced out because of gentrification. So my question to you, Daryl, as this so-called black flight occurs, what would you say that Mount Zion is doing in light of that? Is it still considered a neighborhood or a destination church? And what does it mean to the community? What does it mean to your ministry?
Great question. So with the neighborhood changing rapidly, as you mentioned, it does give us unique opportunities to reach out to a demographic, to reach out to a group of people to serve and to minister to that is not usual. And so there is a little bit of I kind of give people the analogy this way. When you move into a new neighborhood and you don't really know who the neighbors are, is there ever a moment where you catch yourself looking out the blinds or looking out the curtain and then you see your neighbor doing the same thing and then you both kind of shut it real quick because you caught it? I feel like that's sort of what's happening in our neighborhood, is that as new people look in, they're looking at the church to try to figure out what we're about, and we're looking at them, and then we see each other on the sidewalk. And so I think it gives us a unique opportunity to engage and to build relationship with people as they move into the neighborhood. And so specifically for Mount Zion, the church is 146 years old this year,
Wow.
and in Mount Zion is where we're going to stay. We have no ideas of leaving or moving or anything like that. And so we want to be that neighborhood church, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what you look like. We want to be that place for you to come and to be that church for the community. But it does provide some interesting challenges, because if the majority of our members don't live nearby, then we have to be receptive and understanding of the commute that it takes to come to church. And so sometimes our programming has to change because people are making a 20, 30, 40-minute commute to get to church. So we just have to be sensitive to what it is, talk to the membership, what can we do to be more conducive to your condition that you have. But I think it provides us some very interesting and exciting opportunities with the neighborhood changing.
I know Simone Talma Flowers is here, and many of us in this room have experienced the beauty of Interfaith Action of Central Texas, or IACT. It's extremely strong in the area, and it brings together several diverse religious groups in our community. I'm wondering, though, about people in the non-faith community. I mean, have any of you considered making it a regular practice to collaborate across faiths? Not only across faiths, to address community concerns, because it's up to all of us. We wouldn't be here today if we didn't care about our community and making it the best place it could be. So have you considered making it just a regular practice to collaborate across faiths and to bring in people who are not religious particularly into those conversations?
We actually have a practice at my home church where we have what we call strategic partners, and we help fund and resource nonprofits that are going and doing amazing things. So instead of feeling like as a faith community we need to go create a whole lot of different pockets of ministry trying to meet certain needs within the community, we actually lock arms and help resource nonprofits that are doing it and doing it well. Some of them have a faith base, some of them have leaders who have a strong faith, but some of them are not faith-based, and some of them don't have leaders who are necessarily in the same dialogue that we are in terms of our faith. And we found that to be very powerful, because we do believe that we are positioned here in this time, in this place in history, in the neighborhood in which we've been placed, to make a difference. And if you see a non-faith-based organization or a non-faith-based person making massive change in this city, why would you not come alongside and help? And so that's one way that we've been a little more intentional to try to create that connection in those moments within the faith community I'm part of.
Yeah, so I think for the Muslim community, the founding and most important principle and teaching of Islam is an expression we say, La ilaha illallah, which means there is no God except Allah. So an atheist is halfway to being a Muslim. He says there is no God, so there is room to talk about and work with each other. Except for Allah, we would say as Muslims, Allah is the Arabic name for the one God. However, the Quran itself says you should cooperate in any work of good, in any work of charity. So regardless of if they have a faith or no faith, that what's more important at that point is the person crying out for justice, is that woman or child who just lost a loved one and needs support. And so as Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, that if we're all cooperating to uplift that human condition, then that is what Allah or God will be pleased with.
Gail and Daryl, do you want to add to that about reaching across faiths and across communities of people who are not faith-based?
I would just say that you mentioned it, and so I'm not giving the free plug here, but Interfaith Action of Central Texas was probably my biggest introduction into doing that on a consistent basis. And so I'm appreciative of an organization that gives us the platform and the opportunity to come together as faith leaders, not just to build relationship, but to come together for a common good, and to draw in people to say, listen, as human beings, this is an issue that impacts our community, and regardless of where we worship, what side of town, those type of things, all of us are concerned about human beings. And so I think that has impacted me personally, and even in the way I lead, to make sure that I don't allow that to be a hindrance or a boundary when we're trying to help humankind. So
Wonderful. Gail?
Likewise, IACT has also been a key entry point for me in Austin. And one of the things that I think is really powerful about the programs and gatherings that they offer is that if one is a person of faith, that there are certainly ways of connecting on that level. And if one is not a person of faith, then I think there's a way of connecting on the level of being a human being who cares about other human beings.
It's time for our call to action. And what I would like for all of you to tell us basically are some ways that both worshipers and non-worshipers alike can come together to try to address some of the key social issues facing our community right now. Gail, I'm going to let you go first with our call to action.
Okay. So one thing that I think people can do that would have a huge impact is to vote. To vote knowledgeably and in an educated way, and to be able to have your voice be heard. And certainly this upcoming year, there will be lots of opportunities to have an impact in that way.
Islam?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for all of these wonderful questions. So I think what's most important is to know your neighbor, know the person across the street looking from the blind, but also to love them. But the first step has to be knowledge and really knowing them. And this is what leadership Austin is doing, I think, in these sort of breakfasts, is we're getting to know each other. And then the feelings that our religions talk about of love and commitment to one another will grow and develop from there. So I think in terms of an action, you can do with respect to the Muslim community. You're welcome to come to the North Austin Muslim Community Center to see what a Friday sermon is like, to experience the mosque atmosphere, and see again that there isn't anything, scary going on, or nobody's gonna throw stones at you or anything like that. But in fact, you will get to know yourself by knowing your neighbor and by knowing your fellow Austinite as well.
My call to action is to challenge everybody in the new year to be courageous. And what I mean by courageous is to step out of your comfort zone and to visit a place, just as Islam is saying, to visit a synagogue, to visit a church, to visit a faith center, to visit a synagogue, to build a relationship. And most of the reason why we're afraid is because it's driven by stereotypes and perceptions. And the only way you get rid of that is to have conversation and to build relationship and to understand that even if there's a previous hurt, that whoever hurt you does not represent that entire group. And so, again, if I can, there are opportunities throughout the city. IAC just happens to be one of many, but you have things like the Red Bench where you can come and have conversations with people. I love the passport program that they do, where once a month they visit different churches, so that you can have that open door to get in there and do that. And so that would be my challenge to everybody, is to just be courageous and have the courage to love someone that you may have never imagined loving before.
I think mine is sort of ending where we started, which is by issuing a challenge to say, be curious. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think when someone perhaps is not walking in a faith or is a non-believer, doesn't have necessarily an interest, that can also be quite a breeding ground for a lot of assumptiveness and thinking that you already know maybe what each of us believe and you know why you don't believe it. But we represent quite a variety and quite a really beautiful variation of how we came to the place that we hold this dear, that we hold it so dear that for us it has become vocation. It is how we are spending our lives. And so just as I want to encourage the people I lead to stay very curious about people who believe something other than what they believe, I think if we can infuse in this Austin community this beautiful respect of saying, I'm really curious about you as a person. I want to understand why you believe that. And if that's not something that you take on, it's okay. We are not going to try to recruit you in a way that becomes really unfortunate. We just love to have those questions come so that we can tell a little bit more about ourselves and what we understand about our purpose and our place on this planet and what we all are trying to do together. So the same challenge I issue the people I lead is the same challenge that I would leave you with. Let's just all stay curious together and get to know each other.
Now, before we say goodbye and take in the beauty of this conversation today, I want to bring up Geronimo Rodriguez, who is the Chief Advocacy Officer for Ascension Seton, to add a few words to this amazing conversation this morning.
Thank you. Well, first of all, as always, very appreciative of being the sponsor of this event and supporting Leadership Austin and what they do. You know, I've been listening to the panel and just had three real quick thoughts. One is I really have appreciated you all's presence in encouraging us to see each other in ourselves, because I think that's so important and one of the characteristics of Austin. I think the other thing is that I wanted to share this quote that I read about that Pope Francis did. Ascension Seton, as you know, is a Catholic faith-based health ministry. And he said, "There is no alternative. We either build the future together or there will not be a future. Religions in particular cannot renounce the urgent task of building bridges between people and cultures." He said that to 700 representatives of Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and other religions back in February. And he finished by saying, "The time has come when religions should more actively exert themselves with courage and audacity and without pretense to help the human family deepen the capacity for reconciliation, the vision of hope, and the concrete paths of peace." And I just want to add one last thought, which is that Ascension Seton has been here for 115 years. And I have been privileged to serve under a few CEOs. And currently we have Andy Davis, who recently joined us. And I'm always reminded, and he reminds us of our mission of our organization. So I want to just end by sharing our mission that we have for our organization and the community. Rooted in the loving ministry of Jesus as healer, we commit ourselves to serving all persons with special attention to those who are poor and vulnerable. Our Catholic health ministry is dedicated to spiritually centered, holistic care, which sustains and improves the health of individuals and communities. We are advocates for a compassionate and just society through our words and our actions. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Geronimo. Before we thank our panel, a few quick reminders. Don't forget that we're having the Alumni Corner immediately following the breakfast. I'll also be in the back room near the cameras, and I would love to hear your story ideas. This is your chance to influence the media, you guys. Come talk about some of the issues we're covering and stories you'd like to see us cover. And the next Engage Breakfast will be Wednesday, January 8th. The topic will be, can we build a beloved community and keep Austin weird? That's January 8th. Please help me in thanking just these wonderful panelists, and Anna as well. Anna, Julie, Daryl, Islam, and Gail. What a great morning this has been. Thank you.